Hi all, this is my presentation for the final presentation of my education class. Before I move on, I'd like to issue a trigger warning. This presentation will talk about sexual violence and rape, and now is the time to get out of this video before we continue. I'll give it a second. Well, my presentation is on rape culture within higher education. There are a couple symptoms of rape culture. These are only 5. There are many more, but I will be discussing these 5. 1 is rape culture contributes trivialization of experiences. 2, rape culture, a symptom of rape culture is brushing those experiences aside. Another symptom is the language, and there is a lack of education about rape culture. And there's just the outright denial that happens on rape and sexual assault, which continue the cycles of rape culture. The first one is trivialization of experiences. Universities have a history of not taking sexual assault allegations seriously. When they do, the perpetrators typically get a slap on the wrist. So this has an impact twofold on continuing the cycles of violence that rape culture perpetuates. One is that when universities don't take rape allegations seriously, it trivializes the experiences victims face, and it makes it seem like it's not important enough even for universities to address. We kind of know how the criminal justice system works, and we know that they don't take it seriously. So that's 2 systems that are supposed to be protecting women that don't. And then when they give the perpetrators just a slap on the wrist, it seems like it wasn't even worth their time, because eventually those perpetrators get to go back to living a normal life like nothing happened. But as victims, it is kind of hard to get over something as like sexual assault or rape. 2 is the brushing of experiences. When we brush experiences aside, there are multiple impacts that happen. Victims often get told that they're making it up, it didn't really happen, and the most important thing universities have said, you must have wanted it. It always comes back as a test to the victim on whether or not they really wanted it, and not whether or not the perpetrator really forced it upon them. The other one that the universities contribute a lot within the continuation of rape culture is the language we use around rape, sexual assault, etc. We use language around rape as if rape is just another form of sex, which it really isn't. Another thing is how we frame victims, the language surrounding victims on whether or not they are actual victims, questioning their character, etc., is something that oftentimes happens within textbooks, within recounting this, within language in general that the university participates in. Another very trivial one that may or may not seem important, but is just how we say men and women instead of saying women and men, or just people in general. We most of the time say women or men and women. The reason this is important is because when we put one thing first over the other, it shows that first thing we say is important. In psychology, the first thing that we say typically and the last thing we say is remembered. So when we put men first in the sequence, um, that becomes something that our brains remember. But most importantly, let's say we're reading textbooks years and years and years, and we're constantly reading these textbooks, men and women, we eventually start associating men first and then women. Um, and this is just years and years of conditioning that we don't even think about questioning uh, until it's too late. And the next one, which in my opinion is the most important, is the lack of education around rape, sexual assault, etc., sex in general, which contributes to the continuation of rape culture, because as long as we don't know what to question, then it just continues. but it's vital. Education is vital to combat combat ignorance. And often there's a lack of education and people perpetuate violences because they just don't know. We need to listen to one another and one another's experiences because it is important to know what we need to change. For example, rape culture is a very gendered issue, right? But most of the time it is associated with women, specifically white women. We don't take into account really transgender people who face rape and sexual assault in different ways than women do. We don't take that into account when talking and having conversations about rape culture. Oftentimes, Black women face rape culture a little bit differently than white women, because white women typically are seen as the innocent ones, and Black women are seen as promiscuous. They often are not taken even, white women aren't taken seriously, but Black women are taken even less seriously than white women, which is a huge issue, which is something that we need to address within rape culture. And the only way we can is by listening to other people's experiences. There's also a class issue. If someone brings up that they were sexually assaulted or raped, the universities in particular won't take them seriously unless there's some form of financial backing, right? If the university thinks that the victim has a means to suing the university, they will typically do something then. But if the university thinks that they can get away with it without it being a big deal because the victim just doesn't have the time, resources, etc., to fight such a big institution, then they will definitely use that to their advantage. And this just continues a class issue we have. So we need to continue educating each other and talking about each other's experiences in order to address something as big as rape culture, because the higher institutions aren't going to do it for us. The only way we can do that is by educating each other and talking to each other and learning about these things through our own experiences. The lack of education on big events also, if we talk about how there's a lack of how the universities take a lack of initiative. For example, learning about rape in big events like how wars typically contribute to the rape of massive amount of women. We don't learn about that often. Oftentimes it's something that is brushed over or talked about a little bit because it's just not seen as important. The lack of learning about people's experiences and what they go through, how we have a huge institution, the criminal justice institution, that continues to sexually exploit and rape individuals, and how we don't talk about it to this day really in education or address it unless we have a class or two. Uh, but it never really goes outside of the sphere of the classroom if we're even lucky to get that talked about. These experiences are pushed so much in the domestic sphere and seen as so much of as an individual issue that we don't know that this is something that happens more so to so many more people than we actually think. And we just need to be coming together and talking about these experiences, even though they're incredibly difficult to talk about. The last one, which is denial. Universities outright deny that this is something that's happening in their university. They often cover it up. They often say that these things don't happen. There's a history of it. If you do research on rape culture, it's hard because universities are in charge of producing the education, the language, and they're not going to often critique themselves on something as big of an issue like this because they don't want to be seen as looking bad. And it's hard to find numbers and accounts to how many people face this and how many cover-ups there really are, because universities aren't going to report that. Sometimes there are laws that say that they should, but oftentimes there's no way to know if they are actually following those laws. These are my references. Thank you for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat below.